Hello, boys, and of course, any ladies that may be watching. Recently, I say recently, probably about, 2 weeks ago, I had the opportunity to jump in and fly the old CJ Pietenpol. Now, the CJ stands for Chuck Jackson. He's a member of our chapter, and he's one of the principals that built this airplane. Anyway, I got the opportunity to go out and fly it twice.
Thanks, ground. Pietenpol 5-4, Charlie Juliet is on the east side. Taxi instructions to the west runway, please.
The day turned out to be a little bit chilly and a little bit blustery, but the wind was blowing right down the runway. So, of course, I didn't figure it would present any problems. I've never had a problem with a Pietenpol and a crosswind.
Pietenpol 5-4, Charlie Juliet, holding short, ready to back taxi 45 yards for takeoff.
Of course, when I say that, I say it with a caveat. Of course, you can't go out there and fly it with a 90-degree crosswind blowing 30 miles an hour. Of course, you're not going to do that with hardly any airplane. The wind was blowing out of the north, so we're going to use 3-5 today, 3-5 right.
Pietenpol 5-4, Charlie Juliet, ready to take off. 5 knots, stay in the traffic pattern, please.
Now, I really wasn't anticipating any problems with this airplane. Personally, over the past 30 years, I've accumulated a little over 500, probably 550 hours in Pietenpol and Grega GN1 type airplanes and the Pietenpol derivatives. So I was really comfortable in the airplane, but I was really surprised right along about now at how buoyant this airplane is. It's got a 65 on it, but I guarantee you that engine is pumped. I bet it's putting out 75, 80 horsepower. So, what is my first impression? Shoot, boys, my first impression is it's a Pietenpol. Now, Pietenpol has flight characteristics that are unique to the airplane, and that's not taking anything away from the design. The design goes back to 1929, and every time I fly one, you've just got to think, well, heck, I'm back in a Pietenpol. It's just a unique feel. That's all it's on. Now, I'm sure you've heard people say concerning various and sundry airplanes that it's a rudder airplane. And that certainly does apply to a Pietenpol. There's quite a bit of adverse yaw. The ailerons are not the freeze type, as most of you guys know. So you've got to come right in there and coordinate with the rudder as you're maneuvering, making turns, and so forth and so on. The airplane is really very well behaved. I have never come across any nasty vices with the airplane. They're fairly stable. That being said, you can't go out and expect to let go of the rudder and the stick and fly from here to Fort Worth without a heading change or anything like that. Now, that's just not going to happen. But, doggone, it flies great, and for what it is, it's relatively stable. One thing you've got to keep in mind is that it's an airplane with a lot of drag. Beginning with the airfoil. That undercambered airfoil, which Bernie Pietenpol said was similar to the old Jenny airfoil, which was the Eiffel 36. It's pretty high lift airfoil, and because of that, it's pretty draggy airfoil. It's got a lot of brace wires on it, and of course the open cockpit and that landing gear sticking out down there is pretty draggy in and of itself. Now when we come back around for another landing, I will give a little more detail of what you can expect as you're coming around to land the airplane with the power off. What you have to keep in mind, and you know, you've got to understand some of these things, because it's not like a Taylorcraft. For instance, if you pull the power on a Taylorcraft, the doggone thing tends to glide and glide and glide. Now, Pietenpol will glide. It's got a fair glide, but it's certainly not going to be anything like a T-Craft or something like that. Now, you'll notice, look out at the wingtip. You'll notice I'm gliding with the nose fairly well down below the horizon. Some people like to come in with just a touch of power too, and that's not a bad idea if you want to do it that way. I glide in right around 55 or 60 miles an hour. We'll come over the fence probably about 50 miles an hour. Now, one thing you absolutely have to keep in mind is not to round out and start your flare too high, because this airplane has got a lot of drag, and when it pays off, it's going to pay off. You can't treat it like 150. I've seen people in 150s and other type of Cessna airplanes where they will start their flare 15 or 20 feet up in the air. And of course the airplane is a fairly good glider, fairly clean compared to a Pietenpol, and so it's a lot more forgiving in that flight regime. So you got to keep in mind that before you round out and start flaring, you make sure you're not too cotton picking high. The airplane loves to do wheel landings, but it also loves to do full stall landings. So either one is just fine and Jim dandy. Heck, even one wheel landings out of a slip, it'll do that with no problems at all. And speaking of slips, oh good lord, Pietenpol loves to slip. The one that I had that I put most of my Pietenpol type time on, my lord, that airplane would slip with the best of them. The airplane will track extremely well on the ground after you land. There's not a vicious bone in its body. I guarantee you, I've never had a problem with a Pietenpol being squirrely at all. You could probably guess that we've got a little bit of a problem with the windshields being a little bit too low on this airplane. So we get a lot of turbulence in the cockpit, and I have plans to remedy that. All the Pietenpols and Pietenpol derivatives that I have flown had a fairly gentle stall. Now, that doesn't mean that it's just going to hang in there and not drop, drop the wing or drop the nose. Because once that airfoil pays off, it's certainly gonna drop through the horizon. But shoot, as soon as you let the stick pressure off, it's back to flying. So I've never had a problem with the stalls or anything like that. The one that I had would spin up a storm. And now, boys, I'm not telling you to go out and spin your Pietenpols, but I sure did with mine, and never had a problem with it. But I didn't have a tail-heavy Pietenpol either, so you gotta watch your P's and Q's if yours tends to be a little bit on the tail-heavy side. Now, this airplane, the Chuck Jackson Pietenpol, it's got a rudder bar, not the rudder pedals. And that's a little bit unique, but you get used to it very, very quickly. The brakes on this airplane are located up on the fuselage sidewalls. But you really don't need any brake, and unless you're doing a run up or you're taxiing around other airplanes. And you need to be able to stop the aircraft fairly quickly. Some people comment that the airplane is fairly blind, but I never had any problem with it. You can look off to the sides fairly easily, but of course I started off in tail draggers, so yeah, maybe I'm a little biased in that regard. If any of you guys out there are contemplating building a Pietenpol, let me encourage you. You can't go wrong. The airplane is just a wonderful design. And it's a really robust airplane structurally. It's just strong as nails. And it flies great. You'll love it. Trust me, you'll absolutely love it. Okay, first of all, forgive the drawing. I'm not an artist, so if you use your imagination, maybe you can make sense of this. But what we have here basically is a Pietenpol fuselage, front cockpit, the cabane struts here, the wing, the intrepid aviator sitting back here, and a 70-mile-an-hour wind blowing as you're flying along in cruise. This fellow here is Mr. Wind. He's blowing the wind. So the windshields that were on the airplane, they were short and they were age-worn. They had yellowed over age. Plus, there was a fuel shutoff valve here, and it began leaking at some point, and it would leak down somehow or another and get all over this windshield, and you couldn't even polish the stains out. Okay, so what was happening is we'd be flying along, set up in cruise, 70 miles an hour, and that wind would come barreling along and try to negotiate that windshield, and the one up here too. And it would immediately go turbulent. But instead of going turbulent and then coming back and reattaching and going straight out, it got this circulation pattern going. It was almost like a pattern like that, a circulation, clockwise circulation. And what it was doing was coming up here. Of course, I didn't have my leather helmet on, and I didn't have my backwards ball cap on. I just had the old headset on. So what was happening is the 70-mile-an-hour wind was turbulent, and it was coming around and ripping at my hair. It was standing straight up on end, and I'm sure I lost nearly all of my hair up here in the front. The mustache, of course, it was completely in disarray and tangled up. I thought I was going to have to shave it for a couple of hours afterwards, but finally used a conditioner on it and got it back somewhat to normal. But anyway, for these reasons, I decided to make a couple of new windshields. The same thing was happening on the Flybaby that I had, and so I built a new windshield for it, and that solved all of the problems with turbulating air. And so I decided to put two new windshields on the old Pietenpol. So stay tuned. I'll have a video coming up shortly on building the two new windshields for this airplane and installing them. And one other thing before we put an end to this video, I've noticed that my channel, my YouTube channel, has finally broken 400 subscribers. Now, a lot of you guys out there may say, well, Foot, you know, that's nothing, 400 subscribers, but you've got to remember that I started this channel with the idea of just keeping our Experimental Aircraft Association members informed with, videos occasionally. And with that, it has really been a great success. Now, the idea that there are 400 other people out there in the world that find what I'm doing kind of interesting, it just tickles me to death. And I want to tell each and every one of you that I appreciate you guys and you gals. I really do. I'm so grateful that you can find some value in what I'm doing. And believe it or not, it does make making these videos worthwhile. So that's going to wrap this episode up, and I'd just like to say, as always, thanks for watching and stay tuned. Please hit the like button and subscribe. Take care now.